Hello, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and I have another video for you in the Three Rivers Challenge of 2024. I'm coming to you from frigid Northwest Ohio. The temperatures have dropped into the negatives this week, and we are experiencing wind gusts of up to 50 miles an hour. It is cold around here. But last weekend, before the temperatures dropped significantly, the children had a chance to go play out in the snow. And because it wasn't too cold yet, it was perfect packing snow for them to play with. And so we decided to do our typical tradition. What we do on snowy days like this is I make homemade hot cocoa and marshmallow fluff. So what I do is I start with 1 cup of warm water in my mixer, and I add 3 tablespoons of beef gelatin. And you kind of leave it there and let it bloom for a little bit. When you add the gelatin, it will kind of absorb the water and bloom somewhat. Then I'm starting my hot cocoa. I have a gallon of almond milk. I'm adding about 3/4 to a cup of sugar, and then we're going to add about a 1/2 cup of cacao powder here. And that is how I make dairy-free hot cocoa. We're just going to mix that together, get it on the stove, and as it warms up, that cocoa powder will melt into it and make a really rich hot chocolate. Now that the gelatin bloomed, we turn the mixer on and we're going to add 1 cup of liquid sweetener. We do maple syrup. You could also do honey, any kind of liquid. And then we also add a tablespoon of either vanilla extract or peppermint extract. And while that marshmallow fluff is whipping together, the children are going to continue to play. It takes anywhere up to about 10 minutes for that marshmallow fluff to get super fluffy and ready for your cocoa. And when it's done, you have a healthier version of a marshmallow fluff that you can make from your basic pantry staples. Typically, store-bought cocoa contains a whole lot of ingredients that might not be the healthiest, but when you make it like this from scratch out of your pantry staples, there aren't very many ingredients. All of them are relatively healthy and have some kind of health benefit, maybe apart from the white sugar. But you get a really satisfying treat that tastes even better than the store-bought stuff. So I love it when my kids come in from playing outside. We've got all of their things drying by the wood stove and they're enjoying their cocoa. Then on Sunday, it was time to sit down and make my meal plan for the week. If you've been here for a while, you know that I meal plan pretty detailed because this is the only way I can keep track of all of the things that I need to do every week to cook 3 meals from scratch. Then I take that meal plan down into my pantry that's in our cellar and I shop for all of the ingredients that we're going to need to complete all of the meals on the plan for the entire week. I purpose to only go to the cellar one time through the week and not have to make multiple trips, especially when it's super cold like this outside. And then I need to take my inventory and check off everything that I brought up from the pantry. Now for our first meal of the week. It's breakfast, and I have a bunch of bread bits here. I also have a pint of home canned, this was maple pear jelly. I tried to make jelly with maple syrup, and it just didn't set. This was from a couple years ago, and it's just been sitting there. And today is the day I'm going to use it up. I'm also going to use the rest of these water glassed eggs, and we are going to make a French toast casserole. So how I start is by greasing up the bottom of my baking dish here, and then I'm adding a bunch of bread bits. Some of this is homemade bread that we just didn't eat it up, and it wasn't enough for a full meal for the family, on another meal, so I just add it to the bag. Some of this is toast. I had toasted up too much one day for breakfast, and there were just a few pieces left. Added those to the bag. I just collect bread until I have enough to make this recipe, and we typically have this maybe once every other week, intentionally to use up the bread bits that we have around the house. Once the bread's down there, I'm going to pull out my water glassed eggs. You can learn more about water glassing eggs in the video that I will link in the description, but these are eggs from last spring and summer that were preserved in a lime solution. They need to be rinsed off before we can use them, just to make sure all of that lime is off of the shell. We don't want that to end up in our egg mixture. And all I'm doing is cracking each egg individually and just checking to make sure that it preserved well and isn't rotten or anything. And we are going to put it into our bowl here. And these are just as good as using fresh eggs. They bake up really well. So now that I have all of the egg mixture in my bowl here, we're just going to add that pint of syrup. And that is what's going to sweeten our casserole here with maple syrup and a little bit of pear flavor. Also adding a little bit of cinnamon and nutmeg. And I'm going to stir that around until everything is mixed together, and then we are just going to pour this over our bread mixture. This is essentially like making French toast, but it's much easier for a busy mom. I don't have to stand over the stove and flip French toast all morning. Just making sure all of the bread is soaked in by that egg mixture, and then we're going to get this in the oven and bake it on 350 for about 30 to 40 minutes until the egg mixture is thoroughly cooked through. And then I served that casserole with a little bit of powdered sugar and some maple syrup for the children that wanted it, and some nice delicious fruit. So just a nice, easy breakfast to start the week off. Then it was time to start working on dinner. So I have 2 pork roasts. These are pork shoulder roasts that I pulled out of the freezer the day before, and we are just going to sear these up in our cast iron pan before we put them in the crock pot. Monday nights are very busy for us, so I do have to typically do crock pot meals. And what I love to add to my pork roast is this home canned peach salsa. It's peaches, jalapenos, onions, garlic, crushed red pepper, just a lot of really good flavor that I think the peach sweetness really complements the pork well. So I can this up specifically to use in my roasts throughout the year. And so that is going in the crock pot. Now we can work on lunch. I have a pound of leftover bacon from Sunday's breakfast, and I love this recipe book. This is one of my favorite cookbooks, and I was looking for a recipe that would help me use up bacon in a soup, and Hope here has a beautiful corn and bacon chowder, but we're dairy-free, so we're going to kind of change this up a little bit. I'm going to start by putting some of the bacon grease in the bottom of my pot here. And then we are going to add some chopped homegrown onion that is in our storage down in the cellar and get that sauteing. I also chopped up 2 potatoes, just kind of cubed it really small. And then we're adding all of that bacon that has been chopped. We're going to mix that all together here until the onion gets kind of translucent. And then I'm going to add our broth. I'm going to add 2 quarts of home canned chicken broth to the soup, get that all mixed together, and then we're going to add 1 quart of home canned sweet corn from last year. I also had this freeze-dried corn that just needs to be used up. There's just a little left in that jar, and that can just be added to this soup. Of course, we're going to salt and pepper it, and then add a little bit of parsley just for some added flavor. Get this all mixed together, and this is going to be a dairy-free version of the chowder. I am going to add a little bit of arrowroot powder, and that will help thicken it up so that it's not quite watery. That kind of serves the purpose of thickening it like the flour would in the milk in the chowder version. We're going to get this all stirred together, and I'm going to get this out on the wood stove and let this simmer and cook while I do school with the children. And then as soon as school was over, we had this delicious soup. It smelled so amazing, and this was really exciting. This was a new recipe for us that I had adapted, and I think it's a winner. This is what I'm going to make every time I have some leftover bacon now. And you know it's a really good soup when your children devour it, especially the little boys who don't always love soup. They absolutely love this, so this was definitely a hit. Now it's time for dinner. I had meant to add some potatoes around lunchtime to our pork roasts that were in the crock pot, and just it slipped my mind and I didn't get to it. But thankfully I keep these bags of frozen hash browns. The ingredients are just potatoes. I get them from Azure Standard. I keep some of those in the freezer as a backup for days like this. So I just greased my sheet pan here and threw those cubed potatoes on, salt and pepper, and I'm adding a little bit of this barbecue flavored kind of mesquite sprinkling over the potatoes to add a little bit of flavor. We baked those on 350 until they got a little crispy. You could see the pork was super tender, And so I baked up some broccoli with a little bit of oil and salt and pepper, and this is what we had for our dinner on a very busy night of activities. This worked out really well. It didn't require a lot of my time and effort in the evening to get it put together. Now, after I make a roast, I put the leftovers in the fridge. I drain all of the drippings from my roasts into a jar and keep that in the fridge. And then the next time I make a soup or I make some rice or something, I can add that to the pot and it will add delicious, rich flavor and nutrition to that next meal. All right, the next day's breakfast. What I do whenever I cook waffles and pancakes, I can never quite make the right amount. It's always too much or too little. I typically do quadruple or quintuple batches of pancakes and waffles. And if there are any left over, I add them to freezer bags and then I wait until I accumulate enough of these in the freezer for a breakfast for my children. And I pull them out just like you would frozen Eggo waffles, and I put them in the oven under the broiler and they toast up perfectly. And I just needed a quick meal on this day, so it was the perfect reason to get these bags of waffles and pancakes out of the freezer. So as you can see, I just spread them out on my baking sheets, put them under the broiler. I've got children here talking to me while I am getting this work done, and we're going to have a nice pancake and waffle breakfast with very little effort on my part, which is quite a treat for me some of these mornings. We're going to serve it with some maple syrup. Some of the children like powdered sugar. Some of them like fruit on top. And then I also cooked up some eggs because we needed a little bit of protein to have with the carbohydrates. Ended up scrambling them up like this, and that is what we had for breakfast. My little ones can be extremely wasteful with maple syrup, which is never a good thing, but especially during a pantry challenge. So something I've learned, several of you guys in the comments gave me this idea to buy these little cups and pour the maple syrup into that. And then the little children can dip their pancake or waffle into the maple syrup, and it prevents them pouring half of the bottle onto their plate and wasting it. Today for dinner, I'm going to be doing another crock pot meal from this cookbook here. I will link this cookbook in the description. I knew that I wanted to use up wild rice and that this cookbook had a recipe I'd never tried before. So that was the goal, was to make a crock pot meal using some of the wild rice that needs used up in my pantry. So I'm starting by putting that leftover broth from the night before from that roast. This has some broth and fat and flavor, and we are just going to add that to the bottom of our crock pot in place of some of the broth that is in this recipe. Also going to add some water, get all of the last bits that were in that jar, and then we're going to add our wild rice. We're going to do 2.5 cups. Now, I intentionally allowed myself to get low on white rice during the pantry challenge to force myself to use this wild rice. It's just not my family's favorite, and I have this big gallon jar of it that's been sitting there for quite a while. And so I thought the pantry challenge was a great time to kind of force myself to use this up. So we're going to add that to the broth mixture, stir that around, and now we can begin adding the other ingredients that are in the recipe. So the first thing it called for were mushrooms, and I don't have fresh mushrooms obviously in the house right now, and I didn't freeze dry any last year, but I do have these canned mushrooms, and those will do for now, and we'll add those to the pot. The next thing we need are some carrots, and thankfully we have carrots in storage. We also have some carrots still out in the garden that we left there to overwinter that we can grab as we need, but I'm using up the storage carrots that are in the overflow fridge right now before I start dipping into the ones that I have out in the garden. So after we get the carrots mixed in there, next thing is onion. We also have onions in storage. They are starting to go soft, so I'm going to need to deal with them pretty soon here, and we will just freeze dry them and put them into onion powder here sometime in the next couple of weeks. Also have some garlic. The garlic isn't degrading as much as the onions are, so we'll wait to process those a little later in the winter. But I grabbed about 4 or 5 cloves and chopped those up, and those will also go into the crock pot. Now for our spices, we are going to do 2 teaspoons of cumin, Next, we're going to do 2 teaspoons of chili powder. And I was hesitant to do this. I don't want it to be too spicy for my little ones, but I'm trying to follow the recipe just to see how we like it. And then also it called for 1 teaspoon of cinnamon that I also was kind of hesitant to add because I'm not sure about that. But some people add cinnamon to their chili and they love it. So I figured, why not try this? And then we're going to do 1 teaspoon of salt. Next, we're going to add a little bit of pepper and then get that all mixed together. And it is time to now add our chicken. So we tend to have either beef or pork in the crock pot on Monday nights, and we tend to have chicken on Tuesdays. And those are just our really busy activity nights. So the crock pot is what really helps me get a home cooked meal out at dinner when we're busy trying to get everybody ready to leave the house, and maybe children need to eat at different times based on their activity schedule. Okay, so while that's in the crock pot cooking, it's now lunchtime, and I'm going to use up this brown rice macaroni, and we're going to make a chili mac. So here are the ingredients that I'm putting in my sauce. All of this is homegrown, which is always a wonderful feeling. These were homegrown dried beans from long beans I grew last summer. This is a chili base. This is basically all of the seasonings, jalapeno, onion, garlic, everything that flavors our chili that is concentrated into one little pint jar here. And so to kind of water that down, we add the other ingredients. We're going to do 1 jar of our homegrown beef that our butcher cans for us, and then 1 quart of tomato sauce. And all of that together will make our chili base, or our chili sauce. And then I also made a little pitcher here of homemade lemonade to go with our chili mac. This is what the sauce looks like as it's warming up. We basically don't need to cook it because everything's already cooked. We just need to melt down the fat that was in it. And then we can add our cooked macaroni noodles here. These are gluten-free rice noodles. They cook up great. Add that into the pot. And this is just something to kind of break up. We had chili over the weekend a few days before. This just makes it feel a little different, but it's also really comforting to have on one of these really cold days. My children cannot eat enough chili. They love it. And next year, instead of canning so much plain tomato sauce, I think I'm going to really focus on canning more chili base because my kids could easily eat this twice a week, and I definitely didn't preserve enough for the year to do that. So we have our lemonade, we have our little bowls of chili mac, and this was, of course, a hit. I know it's always going to be a hit because my kids love it. And like I said, adding some noodles is a great way to change up your chili and make it feel like a different kind of meal. All right, so later in the day, it was time to check on our crock pot meal. This is what that looked like. Remember, this was a new to me recipe, and to be honest, it wasn't exactly my children's favorite. I think it just might be the wild rice. They're just not used to eating wild rice and are expecting a white rice flavor and texture. So I'm going to look for some other ways to use wild rice throughout the pantry challenge. If you have any ideas or recipes, please leave them in the comments for me to look through. Okay, on to the next day's breakfast. We're going to make zucchini bread, and we're going to do it out of freeze-dried zucchini. I know a lot of gardeners have problems with having too much zucchini and they're just trying to give it away. I never have that problem because I will just freeze dry all of our extra zucchini to use throughout the year to make zucchini bread whenever I want it. So here is the freeze-dried zucchini when I pour it into my bowl, and we are going to rehydrate. And the great thing about rehydrating is you don't have to just use water. You can add any liquid. You could add milk to rehydrate. In this case, I added freshly squeezed orange juice. All of that liquid that you need to replace, you can increase the nutrition by adding something with extra calories or vitamins or whatever you want. Now we're going to make this zucchini bread with cassava flour. This will make it gluten-free. My children aren't gluten-free. I am, but I have this cassava flour that needs used up, so why not go ahead and make this gluten-free for them? I have a sleepy boy who's really hungry and waiting for his meal, so I've got to get this done quickly. We have our flour, salt, baking soda, baking powder, cinnamon, and sugar in the bowl, and the recipe will be in the description. We also added our eggs, our oil, our vanilla extract, and then we're going to go ahead and add that rehydrated zucchini to the mix. And this is what it looks like. The texture is obviously different with a gluten-free flour like cassava flour than it's going to be with a wheat flour. But I find that cassava flour works really great for just swapping out 1-to-1 with wheat flour. And this is how we served it up, with some scrambled eggs, of course, for protein, and some orange slices. We are about at the end of our fresh citrus that we got at the end of December. Pretty soon we will be out, which is kind of sad. Moving on to lunch, I'm grabbing a garlic puck. This is pureed garlic in olive oil, and I'm getting it in my cast iron pan. And to that, I'm going to slice up 1 onion here. We are going to make some chicken noodle soup. I guess it's going to be more like just a chicken and noodle, not necessarily a soup. We're going to make this for lunch out of the leftover chicken from last night's dinner. I always cook more chicken than I need on our Tuesday nights, because I know that I can turn that into an easy lunch the next day. And when you're a homeschool mom, you need easy, quick lunches because you're typically fielding homeschool lessons while also doing your lunch prep. So we got that chicken cut up in the bottom of our pot. We're going to add some carrots here. The onions and garlic are sauteing on the stove. We'll add those after they're done. We're going to get the carrots in the pot. Now I'm going to add freeze-dried celery. This is my favorite way to preserve celery. I find that if you just freeze it, it can kind of get mushy when it thaws. The freeze-drying kind of keeps it a good texture. We're also going to add some freeze-dried spinach powder. And I have this little jar of freeze-dried okra that just needs to be used up. So why not dump that into the pot too? It can't hurt. We're going to open up this quart of chicken broth. We're going to end up adding 2 quarts of broth, and then of course rinse out those jars with a little bit of water to get all of the extra fat and flavor out of the jar that isn't wasted. And we'll add that extra water to the pot too, because as this simmers, some of that water is going to evaporate, and we don't want it to get too dry. Now we need to add some more herbs. We're going to add a little bit of parsley. Of course, as always, add some salt and pepper and get this all mixed around. And you guys know I love to make soup for lunch because now I can just put this right back on the wood stove and get back to my schoolwork. But by about this time, the onions and the garlic are just about done. We need to add those to the pot. Those are kind of the final ingredients. And then right before lunch, all I'll have to do is cook up the noodles, add them to the pot, and we are ready to go. So here's what those onions and garlic looked like. That'll add some good flavor. And all of this in all maybe took me 5 to 10 minutes to get prepped. Put it on the wood stove. It'll take me 5 minutes to get some noodles boiling later on. And I have a nice, nourishing, home-cooked meal for my children for lunch on a busy school day. So I'll add different starches every time I make this. Sometimes I'll add some cooked rice, or if we had leftover rice or leftover potatoes in the fridge, those would work too. But today I'm just using up this pasta. And I know that these are going to be really big, thick noodles, so the texture of the finished dish is going to be more like just a chicken and noodle and not necessarily a soup. And that's nice because some of my little boys, like I said, they don't like soup, but I don't think it's because they don't like the flavor of soup. It's just hard for them to eat, especially my 3-year-old. It just kind of drips everywhere, and he wants me to feed him. But if it's something substantial like this, where he can put big chunks of things on his spoon, I think it's easier for him to eat. And so that is how we made it today. And as you can see, the little guys really did love it. And my 3-year-old here, he can feed himself, and I can feed Hannah, and everybody's happy and going to have a nice full belly before we head to nap time. As I mentioned, I'm still finishing up preserving the citrus and eating up the citrus, but one of my favorite ways is to preserve it is freeze drying the slices. I put them in Mylar with an oxygen absorber, and then all throughout the year, if I ever want sliced lemon for anything, that I need in a recipe or in some iced tea, or if I just want to grind down the rind of that, I have it preserved up. So this is a wonderful addition to the pantry that will be well loved throughout the rest of the year when I don't have fresh citrus. The next meal we need to prepare for is dinner. My sourdough starter is bubbling, and I'm going to use this recipe here to make a pizza crust. But the first thing I need to do is grind down some wheat berries to get flour. When you're making bread, hard wheat berries are better for bread baking. Soft wheat berries are better for soft breads and muffins and cookies and things. I'm just going to get my starter in some water here. I have 1 cup of my starter and I'm mixing it with 1.5 cups of water. Next, I added 5.5 cups of flour, 2.5 teaspoons of salt. I added 3 tablespoons of honey and 3 tablespoons of oil, and we just got that all mixed and kneaded. We're going to cover it, and then later on in the day, I could pull that out after it fermented for a while and flatten it out to make some pizza dough. So this is going to be a taco pizza. I have this taco sauce. I canned it in 2021, and it just isn't our favorite for putting on top of tacos, but I thought maybe I could turn this into a pizza sauce to use to make taco pizza. So we're going to see how this goes here. I just need to get this off the pantry shelves, and it's a pantry challenge, so let's add it to a can of tomato paste and see what we come up with. And so that tomato paste will definitely thicken it up a little bit. You can see the taco sauce is very dark, and that has to do with all of the spices that were in this. I think I followed the ball canning recipe for taco sauce for that batch, and it just wasn't my favorite. We're also going to add this taco seasoning to our meat. I typically make my own taco seasoning, but Redmond's Real Salt had sent me a little gift pack last November to sample some of their seasonings, and I do really love this taco seasoning. It's just as good as my homemade stuff, so really convenient to have that already mixed up for me. So we just spread all of our toppings and everything on top of our sourdough crust and baked it up. It's not the prettiest pizza, but it got the job done, and actually the kids loved this. So moving on to the next day's meals. I'm doing some prep the night before. I've got a ham hock here. This is a fresh ham without any curing agents on it. To it, I'm going to add a bag of celery greens and just random celery bits that were in the freezer. We're going to add 2 pucks of pureed garlic scapes. That's the flowering stalk of the garlic plant. I'm also going to add 1 onion here. And then we're going to fill it the rest of the way with water, add our salt and pepper, and we're going to put this in the crock pot overnight to make a ham broth for split pea soup. Of course, I also need to get those split peas soaking. I'm adding a little bit of lentils. I always like to add lentils to my split pea soup. We add a little bit of acid. That's just some fresh squeezed lemon juice. You could add whey. You could add apple cider vinegar. And then we fill the bowl the rest of the way with water to let those soak overnight. And we'll get back to that later on this day. But for breakfast, we're going to make carrot souffle. This is my favorite way to use up canned carrots. You know, my children don't necessarily love the taste of canned carrots as like a side dish by itself, but they love it mixed in this carrot souffle. So this is pretty much the only reason that I can carrots. And so I can enough to try to have carrot souffle maybe once a month throughout the year as a breakfast. What we need to do first is drain out all of the carrot broth from these jars. These are carrots that were just sliced and canned in water with nothing else, no salt or anything added. But we will not waste that broth. As you guys know, I will use it in something else. We will probably add it to our soup later on in this day, so none of the nutrition in that is wasted. So we'll just get that jar put in the fridge, and we will not toss that down the sink. Okay, next we are going to work on the carrot souffle. I'm once again using this cassava flour, and we need 3 tablespoons of flour. To that we added 1 teaspoon of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and a 1/2 cup of sugar. Those were all of our dry ingredients. And I've got a little helper here working on mixing it together. I always love having children helping me in the kitchen. It makes it so much more fun. Next, we're going to add 1 quart of our carrots, and these carrots are cooked down, so they're rather soft. We need a 1/2 cup of olive oil. We're going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and we're also going to add 3 eggs. Those are all of our wet ingredients. Then we could start mixing this together. Now, as I mentioned, those carrots are soft from the canning process. That's what makes this super convenient. If you wanted to make this without canned carrots, you would need to cook your carrots first before you can even make the souffle. So we can get that all mixed together. If you want it to be super smooth, you could put it in the blender or the mixer, but it works just fine doing it by hand with a little bit of elbow grease. Now, speaking of grease, we greased up the bottom of our baking dish here, poured it in, and we're going to cook this on 350. How long it takes depends on the size of the dish you use. While it is cooking, we are going to work on juicing some oranges for some fresh squeezed orange juice, and we're going to add that to a quart of our home canned cranberry juice to make a little bit of juice for the children this morning with their breakfast. That's always a wonderful treat that they enjoy. We just need to strain out the cranberries, mix these together. The cranberry juice does not have any sugar in it. It's rather tart, and so adding the orange juice to it makes it sweet enough that then the children enjoy the taste. Of course, having scrambled eggs, and this is our carrot souffle. I hadn't made this souffle in a couple months, and I have realized that now that some of my little ones are eating more, that we are probably becoming a 2 souffle family. So in the future, I will definitely be doubling this recipe, which means I need to can twice as many carrots next summer. And that's why I do this pantry challenge too, is that it gives me a good idea of how I need to adjust my preserving efforts for the coming growing season. Okay, now let's make this lunch that we had started last night. We have our ham hock that is cooked down. We have our soaked peas and lentils. I have this carrot juice left over from breakfast, and I have some raw carrots from storage. So we're going to start by draining the soaking water out of those split peas. Soaking it will make this cook a lot faster on the stove because these dried peas and lentils have absorbed water. They tend to cook twice as fast as they would if I were starting from dry. And then to that, we're going to begin adding our ingredients. Of course, going to add in that carrot broth so it's not wasted. Now we need to start picking the meat off of this ham hock so that we can add that ham to our split pea soup. Some people will just add the ham hock into the bowl with the split peas and cook it that way. But I find cooking it like this the night before allows me to shred all the meat off of it. I'm saving some of that meat for a different meal, and then half of it will just go into the pot with the split peas. I'm also going to chop up some carrots here so that we have some carrot bits in there. Those will cook down and soften. And then now we can strain out the broth from the ham hock and add it back to the pot. And I just find this to be an easier way for me to make split pea soup quickly on a busy school day. So all of that is mixed together. All we need to do is add our salt and pepper and whatever other seasonings we want, get it on the wood stove or the stove to cook. We're working our way through our school day, and then after school is done, we have a delicious, thick, creamy split pea soup. Now, if I had leftover potatoes or rice in the fridge, I would add those to this. Any leftovers like that, any leftover meat, if I didn't add the ham hock, would be a great addition. Soups like this are a great way to clear out your fridge out of leftovers that need to be used up. Now it's time for dinner. I mentioned that on Mondays we typically have beef or pork, and on Tuesdays we have chicken. Wednesdays we have pizza. On Thursdays we typically have fish of some sort. So I'm chopping up some potatoes here. We're going to fry those up. And then this is some cod in place of salmon. Sometimes we have salmon. Other times we like to have cod. I just sprinkle it with Old Bay seasoning because I know that's how the children will eat it. They really like that. And then we're just going to bake this cod on this day to make it as easy as possible. Sometimes I'll sear it or bread it, but we're just going to bake it on 350. I'm also opening a quart of home canned kale. A lot of people ask what that tastes like. Well, the texture's a lot like canned spinach, but it's a little thicker of a leaf because it's kale. It's actually really delicious. I love canning it because it's pre-cooked. All I do is add some salt, warm it up, and we have a really easy side dish to go with our cod here. The kale is warmed up, and then we have our fried potatoes. Super yummy, super easy. I decided to open a couple quarts of home canned pears, And then we're going to save the juice from those pears, and I will add them to some kind of dessert or fruit gummy snack or popsicles, whatever I want to make with that fruit juice later on. Got it plated up, and we always love fish night. It's just a yummy, healthy dinner. And now let's move on to the next day. So I'm going to make some muffins. This is my blueberry muffin recipe. We are going to grind down some wheat berries for some flour, and I'm going to adapt this basic muffin recipe and turn it into an orange cranberry muffin. And I'm making these the evening before because I want them to be ready for an easy, quick breakfast on Friday morning. I have 2 cups of flour, a half a cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a half a teaspoon of salt, and then I have my freeze-dried cranberries here. We need to rehydrate these, and since they're orange cranberry muffins, why not rehydrate with orange juice, and that will give us that much more of an orange flavor in our muffins. That will rehydrate, and as it's sitting there, we're going to go ahead and add our wet ingredients. We're going to add our 1 egg, a half a cup of oil, 1 cup of liquid. I'm using orange juice. You could use milk or whatever, but to make the cranberry orange, we're adding orange juice. I'm also going to add orange extract, a teaspoon of this. This was made the same way you make homemade vanilla extract, just with freeze-dried orange slices in place of vanilla beans. We added our oil, and then of course we're going to add our rehydrated cranberries with the orange mixture and get this all mixed together. Now you can see I doubled this recipe. The amounts I gave were for a single batch, but I will put the recipe in the video description for you if you're interested in this. These baked for about 20 minutes on 400 degrees, and as I mentioned, I got them done the night before because on this Friday morning, we are going to have a homeschool open gym day, and we need to get out of the house very quickly. So all I needed to do was scramble up some eggs quickly. My muffins were already baked, and I could feed the kids before we headed to the gym. We got home a little later than I wanted, and so I just decided to have a leftover day. I just pulled out all of the leftover random soups that we had from the week and warmed each of them up and let the children choose what they wanted to have, and it worked out perfectly. We were able to clear the fridge out of all of those leftovers. Everybody had a nice warm home-cooked meal after our very busy morning, and I wasn't frantically trying to cook a new meal since I had all these leftovers available. A lot of people ask what we do with leftovers. Well, this is what I do. I'll plan meals where we just use it all up and get it out of the fridge. Now it is time for dinner. I have some steaks thawed here. I'm cooking up some rice. I have some onion sauteing, and I'm going to add some frozen peppers from our garden last year. I'm also adding a cube of garlic puree, and we are going to make homemade fajita bowls. So we have our steak, we have our peppers, our onion and garlic, our rice, we have black beans, this is corn relish. I follow the ball canning recipe for corn relish, and we absolutely love it. And then everybody could make their own little fajita bowl. This saved me having to make homemade tortillas. I had actually planned on making tortillas that night, but last minute I switched it up to just make rice, and we would have it in a bowl instead. So that was it for this week's meals. Today, when I'm voicing this, it is Saturday, January 13th, which is actually my 43rd birthday. And so David spoiled me by making biscotti for breakfast, and he cooked bacon and eggs so that I didn't have to cook anything. He fed the family for me, which was wonderful, and everybody is taking over other meals throughout the day, so I don't have to lift a finger. I feel very loved and spoiled, and I'm really going to enjoy this day with my family. So thank you for being here, stopping by and watching our video. I will be back next week with week 3's meals. And until then, I hope you all have a blessed day. Try to stay warm if you are in an area that is dealing with these cold temperatures. Bye.